Imagine a power grid that is, generating so much clean, free wind and solar energy that operators are forced to literally just throw 96% of it in the trash.
Yeah, that is the great paradox of the energy transition.
Right, because you have these turbines spinning, you have panels soaking up the summer sun, and nearly all of that electricity is just dumped. It's entirely wasted.
Well, because the grid has nowhere to put it.
Exactly. It's like
Right.
trying to catch a fire hose in a teacup.
Mm-hmm.
We spend so much time debating how to build more sleek electric cars or these massive solar farms, but the real secret to decarbonization and, honestly, to saving the grid from collapsing under its own excess power might literally be hidden inside the walls of our homes or buried under the streets.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon called CEsh, or critical excess of electricity production.
CE.
Right. Because we can't dispatch renewables on demand, sudden spikes in generation lead directly to C. When you hit that point, operators are forced into mass curtailment. You have to throw the power away to prevent the grid from overloading.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are unpacking a really fascinating 2022 paper published in Energy Conversion and Management by Novesol and colleagues.
Right.
And they're looking at a solution to this CE problem through something called district heating and cooling systems, or DHC.
Yeah, the idea is that municipal heating and cooling can act as a massive sponge, to soak up all that unpredictable, intermittent, renewable energy.
And that is critical because, according to our sources, buildings represent over 40% of the single largest energy consumers across the EU.
And 36% of the greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow. And the vast majority of those emissions are directly linked to space heating and domestic hot water arrays.
Exactly. So using power-to-heat technologies to solve CEP is conceptually very elegant. You take the excess electricity that would otherwise be curtailed, run it through electric boilers or heat pumps to turn it into hot or cold water, and just store it for later.
You're essentially using the city's thermal demands as a giant overflow pool for the electrical grid.
Precisely. But while that overflow pool concept makes total sense, it led to this really glaring blind spot in the scientific community.
Right, and this is where we need to explicitly identify the research gap that these authors were trying to solve, the Mediterranean blind spot.
Yes. Historically, the potential of district heating to act as a giant grid battery has been heavily studied, but almost exclusively in cold northern climates.
We're talking Scandinavia, right? Places with long freezing winters.
Exactly. Places where massive district heating networks, centralized plants pumping hot water through insulated pipes under the streets are already just a way of life.
So territories in mild and Mediterranean climate zones have been, practically ignored in the current literature?
Almost entirely.
Yeah.
Because these regions have historically lower shares of district energy systems, scientists and urban planners largely assume the thermal battery concept wouldn't really apply there.
They focused all the modeling and all the investment entirely on regions with massive winter heating loads. But wait, if we're talking about places like the Mediterranean with mild winters, heating obviously isn't their primary issue. They are going to use way less energy for space heating overall.
Yeah.
So why does it matter if we study them? Aren't the northern climates where the real energy drain is anyway?
Well, that is the exact assumption that created the blind spot in the first place. You have to look at the other half of the equation.
Cooling.
Cooling. Exactly. Climate change, coupled with, rising living standards and purchasing power, is drastically increasing cooling demands globally.
Oh, that makes sense.
And air conditioning load profiles are completely different from heating load profiles. They peak in the middle of the summer day.
Which, coincidentally, is exactly when solar photovoltaic generation is at its absolute highest.
And most prone to CEP. Exactly.
Yeah.
You cannot possibly reach the EU's strict decarbonization targets for 2050 if you are only focusing your scientific models on cities where it snows.
Because you're ignoring half the continent. And more importantly, you're ignoring the skyrocketing demand for cooling.
Right. Which means the researchers couldn't just write a paper complaining about this gap. They had to actually build a tool capable of calculating it.
And that leads us to the paper's core contribution, how they actually solved this problem. The authors took an existing linear optimization tool called the H2RES model, and they totally upgraded it.
Yeah, previous versions of this model could only calculate heating demands.
So the core contribution here is that the authors painstakingly rewrote the base module of H2RES to handle district cooling alongside the heating.
And we should probably clarify what a linear optimization model like H2RES actually does, because It is far more complex than just tallying up megawatt hours on a spreadsheet.
Right, it's not just a fancy calculator.
No, not at all. It runs in Python and uses a professional solver to calculate energy dispatch on an hourly basis while simultaneously modeling long-term yearly capacity investments.
So its main algorithmic goal is to minimize the total annual discounted cost of the whole energy system.
Exactly. It's balancing the actual capital expenditures, the financial cost of building new physical technologies like heat pumps, electric boilers, or thermal storage tanks against operational realities.
And the most vital operational reality they programmed into the model is this massive penalty cost for wasting energy. They set the penalty for CEP, that curtailed spilled energy we talked about, at 4,000 euros per megawatt hour.
And that figure is absolutely crucial. A penalty of 4,000 euros per megawatt hour forces the optimization model into an incredibly rigid mathematical corner.
Because it makes curtailment financially ruinous.
Exactly. The model is highly motivated to figure out a way to build out the physical infrastructure necessary to use every drop of wind and solar power rather than throw it away and absorb that massive fine.
It creates this rigorously realistic environment to test just how far we can push power to heat and power to cooling technologies.
Right. So to deploy this newly upgraded tool, they needed a testing ground that actually represented the problem.
And they chose the Republic of Croatia as their ultimate case study, which I thought was a brilliant choice.
Oh, it's the perfect laboratory for this.
Because Croatia is geographically split right down the middle when it comes to climate, right?
Yeah. You have a continental climate in the interior, like this capital city, Zagreb, where it gets quite cold, and heating is a major factor.
But then you have the coastal Mediterranean climate, like the city of Split.
Exactly, where it's much milder in the winter, but they have intense, sustained cooling needs in the summer.
So by modeling 9 specific Croatian cities, which I think collectively cover, 37% of the country's total heating demand?
Yes, and 34% of its cooling demand.
Right. So by modeling those cities, the authors could run a comprehensive stress test to finally fill that mild and Mediterranean research gap.
They captured both sides of the thermal coin within a single, unified national grid.
Okay, so to actually prove this works, they couldn't just look at the current grid. They had to push this virtual national grid to the absolute breaking point to see what would happen.
Yeah, they had to stress test it.
So first, they established a reference scenario. That represents a baseline with no district heating or cooling at all.
None, just the grid.
Right. Then they started pumping this virtual grid with extreme levels of intermittent renewables. They increased wind and solar simultaneously in these massive steps: 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, and finally 8,000 megawatts of capacity for both wind and solar.
And to ground that 8,000 megawatt number for you, consider that a typical large-scale nuclear reactor generates about 1,000 megawatts.
Oh, wow.
So in their extreme scenario, they are injecting the equivalent of 8 massive nuclear reactors worth of power into the grid.
But unlike a nuclear plant, which provides, steady baseload power, this is 8,000 megawatts of highly volatile, weather-dependent energy.
Exactly. It is an incredible amount of chaotic power for a grid operator to manage.
So against that chaotic energy, they tested 3 levels of district heating adoption across these cities: 30%, 50%, and 90% of total heat demand.
Right.
And then they mixed those with 3 levels of district cooling adoption: 10%, 30%, and 50%.
But they added a really brilliant technical constraint to the model here.
Oh, the boiler limit. Yes. They artificially limited the total capacity of electric boilers in the system to either 600 megawatts or 2,500 megawatts.
Yeah.
Which, I have to admit, when I first read that, I wondered, if the whole point of power to heat is to use electricity to make heat, why would they cap the electric boilers? Shouldn't we let the model build as many boilers as it wants to soak up all that C?
Well, capping the boilers addresses the underlying thermodynamics and economics of energy systems.
How so?
So electric boilers are very cheap to manufacture and install.
Yeah.
But they are highly inefficient from a thermodynamic perspective. They convert electricity to heat at roughly a 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay.
Heat pumps, on the other hand, are very expensive to install. They require significant capital expenditure, but they are incredibly efficient.
Because they don't just generate heat, they move existing thermal energy from the environment.
Exactly, achieving efficiencies of 300 or 400%.
Oh, wow. So it's a strict cost versus efficiency trade-off. By capping the cheap, inefficient boilers, the authors force the optimization model to make hard mathematical choices.
Yes, it stops the model from taking the easy, unrealistic way out by just spamming cheap boilers everywhere.
Right, it has to act like a real city planner who is balancing a constrained municipal budget.
Exactly. It forces the system to calculate exactly when it is worth it to invest in an expensive, efficient heat pump versus when it just needs to burn through excess chaotic power with a cheap boiler.
That makes total sense. So with those parameters set, we get to the major results. How we actually slay this CE monster.
And the results were genuinely striking. Let's look at that baseline nightmare scenario we discussed earlier.
The one with 8,000 megawatts of wind and solar.
Right, with zero district heating or cooling to absorb it.
Yeah.
In that scenario, the wasted energy hit an astonishing 96.41%.
96%. Almost all of the clean energy being generated is totally useless.
Because the electrical grid simply cannot absorb the spikes, and there is no thermal buffer to take the overflow. The grid essentially collapses under the weight of its own unused power.
But by introducing the highest level of district heating and cooling, which they call the HC3 scenario, representing 90% heating adoption and 50% cooling adoption, that wasted energy dropped dramatically.
It did. It went from over 96% down to 56.7% under the strict boiler limits.
And it plummeted all the way to 36% with the higher boiler limits.
We are talking about rescuing massive amounts of clean energy simply by redirecting it into the thermal demands of the cities.
And here's the detailed breakdown that I think is really key. The inclusion of cooling is what validates their entire reason for upgrading the H2RES model in the first place.
Yes, district cooling had a disproportionately massive impact on the results.
Right, because in the scenarios, cooling adoption only ranged from 10% to 50%. It represents a much smaller total energy load than heating does.
But despite being the smaller slice of the pie, adding cooling reduced the wasted electricity by an average of 12% across the board.
Because if you don't model cooling, you have no sponge during the summer.
Exactly. The heating systems are offline. A Mediterranean city like Split isn't running its district heating in July.
But the solar panels are maxed out.
Right. District cooling provides essential flexibility to the grid during those summer months, creating a year-round thermal battery rather than just a winter one.
It proves unequivocally that the Mediterranean and mild climates hold the key here. Expanding our view beyond those Nordic models is absolutely essential for grid stability.
Definitely.
And that leads to what I think is the ultimate aha metric of the entire paper, the Goldilocks zone.
The 4,000 megawatt scenario.
Exactly. In the HC3 scenario, with high heating and high cooling adoption, when they pumped a more balanced 4,000 megawatts of wind and 4,000 megawatts of solar into the grid, the system generated 17.13 terawatt hours of power.
And the total grid demand for everything was 23.5 terawatt hours.
Right.
And to put terawatt hours in perspective for a second one, terawatt hour is 1 billion kilowatt hour.
1 billion?
Yeah. It is a staggering scale of energy consumption. It represents the annual power needs of hundreds of thousands of homes.
And in this scenario, wind and solar successfully covered a massive 73% of the country's total electricity demand. And the wasted energy rate was kept down to a mere 5%.
That is the holy grail for grid operators.
You have almost 3/4 of the entire national grid running on chaotic, intermittent renewables, and barely any of it is being thrown away.
Because the district heating and cooling networks are constantly dynamically adjusting to absorb the peaks and valleys.
But achieving that 73% coverage with only 5% curtailment requires looking deeper into the technology tug-of-war happening inside the model.
Yeah, what specific hardware is actually getting built in these virtual cities to achieve this balance? This is where we see some highly counterintuitive behavioral quirks from the linear optimization solver.
Right, I was looking at the charts, and the boiler versus heat pump paradox is just fascinating.
It really is.
You would naturally assume that as you add more and more clean energy to a grid, the optimization model would invest in the best, most advanced green technology available.
The highly efficient heat pumps.
Right, but it doesn't do that at all.
Counterintuitively, no. As wind and solar capacity scaled up toward that extreme 8,000 megawatt limit, the model actively stopped investing in efficient heat pumps.
It just stopped building them.
Yeah. Instead, it started maxing out the cheap, inefficient electric boilers up to whatever arbitrary limit it was allowed by the researchers.
The higher the renewable penetration, the more the model favored thermodynamic inefficiency. Which sounds crazy at first.
It does. But it makes perfect sense when you relate it back to the financial optimization and that 4,000 euro penalty we talked about.
Think about it like this. If you have a leaky pipe in your house, you want a precise surgical tool to fix it perfectly.
Right. That's your expensive heat pump.
Yeah.
It operates continuously, smoothly, and uses very little energy to maintain the temperature.
Exactly. But if a dam breaks and you suddenly have 1 million gallons of water rushing toward your house for free, you don't care about a surgical tool.
You just need the biggest, cheapest bucket you can possibly find to dump the water into so your house doesn't flood.
Right. And the electric boiler is that cheap bucket.
Precisely. When you have 8,000 megawatts of free but completely chaotic wind and solar power flooding the grid, thermodynamic efficiency is no longer the primary constraint.
Capital expenditure is.
Exactly. You don't want to spend millions of euros building highly efficient heat pumps when you only need to turn them on for a few hours a day during extreme solar spikes.
You just need a massive, cheap piece of hardware to dump the electricity into immediately.
So you avoid that punishing €4,000 per megawatt hour penalty for step-up.
So the model optimizes for total system cost, not raw thermodynamic efficiency.
Yeah, it's a brutal economic reality check for how we design our future grids.
We might not need everything to be perfectly efficient. We might just need enough cheap sinks to absorb the chaos.
Which leads us to the final, and perhaps most profound, major finding of the paper, the storage revelation.
Oh, yes, the pipes. Because usually the golden rule of modern energy planning is that more renewables inherently require more storage.
Right. If you have more wind and solar, you must build more massive lithium-ion battery parks, or in the case of thermal systems, giant, expensive, insulated heat storage tanks.
But the H2RES data showed the exact opposite happening in some of these high adoption scenarios. Higher shares of district heating and cooling actually reduced the need to build dedicated heat storage tanks.
Which begs the question, where is all that energy going, if not into dedicated storage tanks?
It's going into the network itself.
Exactly. The massive, interconnected web of district water pipes flowing under the city acts as its own battery.
The thermal mass of millions of gallons of water inside the municipal infrastructure just absorbs the heat.
It forces us to reevaluate our whole definition of energy storage.
Because municipal infrastructure, the heavily insulated pipes running under the streets connecting thousands of buildings, is just as vital and acts in the exact same way as highly advanced chemical batteries for the future of the power grid.
Yeah. By expanding the physical network of pipes to more neighborhoods, you natively expand the capacity of the thermal battery without having to build a single dedicated storage tank.
That is just incredible. So, synthesizing this research, we started by identifying a massive blind spot in the scientific literature.
Right. For years, planners viewed district heating as a tool exclusively for freezing northern climates.
Completely ignoring the potential of mild and Mediterranean regions. We saw how upgrading the H2RES optimization model to finally include district cooling allowed researchers to test these overlooked climates.
And they proved unequivocally that regions with mild winters and hot summers can and must use district heating and cooling as a giant urban battery.
The results demonstrated that by utilizing that thermal battery, a country could theoretically meet nearly 3/4 of its entire electricity demand using nothing but intermittent wind and solar.
While keeping curtailed energy to a tiny 5%.
Furthermore, we learned that the economics of extreme renewable grids actually favor massive, cheap thermal buckets like electric boilers over expensive surgical efficiency.
And that the municipal pipe networks themselves serve as grid-scale energy storage.
It reframes the entire conversation around climate change and grid stability. Decarbonization isn't just about what generates our power far away on a wind farm in the ocean.
No, it is intricately tied to the very intimate processes of how we heat our morning showers and how we cool our living rooms in the afternoon.
The demand side is just as powerful and just as necessary as the supply side.
We simply cannot solve the generation problem without simultaneously solving the thermal demand problem. They are permanently mathematically linked.
The next time you walk down a city street, look at the buildings around you. We constantly debate whether we should build more wind turbines on the hills or more solar farms in the desert to meet our energy needs. But based on what we've learned today, maybe the real question we should be asking our local city councils is, what exactly is flowing beneath our feet, and are we utilizing that infrastructure to save the grid above?